The scent of wildflowers and honeyed candle wax should have been sweet, intoxicating, romantic. Instead, it choked me. It was the smell of my own funeral. I stood at the edge of the forest clearing, a ghost in plain sight, my pale hair a flag of surrender in the late afternoon sun. Hundreds had gathered, their laughter a cruel symphony against the rustle of silk ribbons I had tied with my own hopeful hands just weeks before. I watched them, these people I had called my pack, feasting on food I had helped hunt, drinking wine I had helped store, celebrating the union that had shattered my soul. My fingers dug into the rough bark of the ancient oak beside me. The pain was real, solid. It was the only thing that was. It proved I was still here, even if I was invisible. "Can you believe she actually came?" The whisper slithered through the air from a cluster of she-wolves by the flower-draped archway. Alara. We had learned to shift together, skinning our knees on the same river stones. After everything Kale said about her, I would have thrown myself into the ravine. A giggle, sharp as broken glass. "Maybe she's here to beg. You know how pathetic she was at the end, clinging to his legs, sobbing." I turned away before the rest could find its mark. The words were old knives, but they still cut. 3 months since Kale, my destined mate, my everything, stood before the entire pack council and carved me open with words. His voice, once my sanctuary, had turned to winter frost. "You are too soft, Alara," his golden eyes devoid of all warmth. "Too gentle. You weep for fallen sparrows and heal wounded foxes. My pack needs a Luna of storm and iron, not a caretaker of broken things." The memory was a living thing, a wolf chewing on my bones. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself, though that agony was a universe of fire. No, the worst was the contempt, the way he made our 2 years together seem like a burden, a mistake he was finally, publicly correcting. He didn't just reject me, he erased me, and then he announced his engagement to Celine. Beautiful, fierce Celine, with her onyx black hair and a gaze that could strip bark from a tree, the future Luna he truly deserved. "Excuse me?" A young Omega girl, her arms overflowing with white roses, barely glanced at me. "You're in the way. The ceremony starts soon." "Of course, my apologies," I whispered, stepping aside. She scurried past as if my touch were poison. Even the Omegas now looked through me. I was nothing, the rejected one, the ghost. But they had no idea why I had truly come back, no idea what simmered beneath the surface of my calm, or what I now carried within my soul. I smoothed the fabric of my dress. Not white, never again white. This was deep forest emerald, a color that made my skin glow and my hair look like moonlight on water. The silk whispered as I moved, elegant and modest, but undeniably different. It was a dress for a woman who knew her worth, not a girl begging for scraps. "Well, well," the voice behind me was a venomous caress. "The ghost decides to materialize." I turned, slow and deliberate, to face Celine. She was a vision in ceremonial white leather and silver, a warrior princess carved from marble and ambition. She looked every inch the triumphant Luna. "Congratulations, Celine," I said, my voice a calm pond. "I wish you both every happiness." Her perfect smile was a knife without a... They were silver, pure, liquid, luminous silver that glowed with an inner light. A collective gasp, a whispered tsunami swept the crowd. Lycan. It was a prayer and a curse. Lycans did not attend pack weddings. Lycans existed in stories, in warnings, a mythic bloodline separated from wolf politics for centuries. And their king, for that is who he had to be, was walking directly toward me. The crowd parted like a sea before a glacier. Kale stood frozen, his anger replaced by stunned disbelief. Celine had gone bone white. The Lycan king stopped 3 feet away, and the world shrunk to the space between us. Up close, he was devastating. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. Those impossible silver eyes found mine, and for a fleeting second, something gentle flickered in their metallic depths. Then he extended a hand, palm up, a gesture both commanding and reverent. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and dark, like bedrock shifting. "My queen," he said, the words resonating in the sudden, absolute silence. "Shall we take our seats? I believe the entertainment is about to begin." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. The world had narrowed to the sound of blood roaring in my ears and the sight of that outstretched hand. His hand, the hand that had pulled me from the abyss. Every eye in the clearing was a brand upon my skin. I could feel Kale's gaze, a physical heat of shock and dawning furious understanding. I could feel Celine's icy hatred. I could feel the pack's collective disbelief, thick enough to choke on. But I only looked at him, at Kieran, the king with the silver eyes who had found a shattered thing in a muddy ravine and hadn't looked away. The world tilted, but his presence was my anchor. I placed my hand in his, a jolt, not of electricity, but of profound recognition, of a bond deeper than blood or bone, surged up my arm and settled in my soul. His fingers closed around mine, warm, strong, unshakable. "Yes," I said, and my voice did not tremble. It carried, clear and certain, across the deathly quiet meadow. "Let's." He turned, and with that simple movement, he faced the assembly not as a guest, but as a sovereign surveying his domain. His silver gaze swept over the crowd, a silent command that even the proudest wolves bowed their heads. Finally, it landed on Kale, and the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I am Kieran Thorne," he announced, and his voice held the weight of centuries. "High King of the Lycan bloodlines, sovereign of the northern wastes and the silent forests." He paused, letting the terrifying titles sink into the stunned silence. "And this," he said, his fingers tightening ever so slightly around mine, "is my wife. Your former packmate is now your queen, the queen of every Lycan, every territory, from these woods to the eternal ice. You will show her the respect that title demands, or you will answer to me." The silence that followed was so profound I could hear the distant cry of a hawk, the rustle of a leaf 100 yards away. It was broken by a choked sound from Kale's direction. Alpha Brighton, his face pale beneath his weathered tan, pushed his way forward, offering a deep, formal bow. "Your Majesty," Brighton stammered, "this is an honor beyond words. We had no notification of your attendance." "The invitation was for all former members," Kieran replied, his tone deceptively mild. "My wife wished to pay her respects. I saw no reason to deny her." The word wife landed. Kieran guided me to a bench someone had hastily provided. His 3 warriors, Jackson, with a scar cutting through his brow, Elias, whose quiet presence sought everything, and Lyra, whose delicate frame hid the strength of forged steel, took up positions nearby, a silent, impenetrable wall. "You faced them well," Kieran murmured, his voice a low rumble meant only for me. His thumb stroked the back of my hand, a small, steadying touch. "Better than I faced my first council. I believe I growled at an elder twice my age." A faint, real smile touched my lips. "You're making that up." "Perhaps," he conceded, a glint of humor in his silver eyes. "But the sentiment is true. You were magnificent." I wanted to believe him, but as the pack shaman, an ancient she-wolf with milky, seeing eyes, began to chant the old words, a different kind of cold seeped into me. Not the cold of fear, but the cold of finality. I had dreamed of this moment once. I had stood in my small room practicing the bonding vows, imagining Kyle golden eyes full of love, not contempt. Now, watching him repeat hollow words to another, I felt nothing. Not pain, not longing, just a vast, quiet relief that the nightmare of that dream was over. Do you, Celine, accept this bond? Do you pledge your strength, your loyalty, your wolf to this union, from this moon until your last? I do. Celine's voice rang out, clear and defiant, a challenge thrown at the shadows where I sat. The shaman turned to Kyle. And do you, Kyle, son of Brighton, accept this bond? Do you pledge your heart, your spirit, your eternal protection to the she-wolf, your chosen mate? The pause was a lifetime. The clearing held its breath. I saw his throat work. His eyes, against his will, found mine across the distance. In that fraction of a second, I saw not love for Celine, but a turbulent storm of regret, pride, and fury, all directed at the consequence of his own choice, standing beside a Lycan king. I do. The words finally came, but they sounded like stones dropped into a deep well. A collective, subtle exhale whispered through the pack. The shaman bound their wrists with the silver cord, the metal shimmering in the setting sun. The ceremony was complete. They were bonded. Music swelled, wine flowed, and the forced merriment of the celebration began in earnest. The pack tried to forget the two silent, terrifying observers under the willow. "We should leave soon," Kieran said softly, his gaze scanning the crowd, "before the wine drowns their caution and someone thinks bravery is a good idea." I nodded, but as I made to rise, a small, fierce comet of energy shot through the legs of the revelers and launched itself at me. "Ilara!" Lily, the 8-year-old daughter of a pack hunter, a whirlwind of red curls and fearless joy. Before the guards could react, she was in my arms, hugging me with the uncomplicated strength of pure love. "You came back! I told Mama you would. I told everyone. They said you were gone forever, but I knew." My heart cracked and healed in the same instant. I held her tight, ignoring the gasps around us. "Lily, sweetheart." Her mother, Flora, rushed forward, face pale with terror. "Your Majesty, I am so sorry. She slipped away." "It's perfectly all right," I said, smiling at the girl who had been my shadow, who I'd taught to find bird eggs and which berries were safe. "Hello, little wolf." Lily pulled back, her bright eyes wide. "Are you really a queen now, like in my storybook?" "It seems so," I said. My own wolf, small and quiet as she was, prickled at the edges of my senses. She felt them first. The shift in the wind that carried not pine, but musk and aggression. The faint, deliberate crack of a twig to the east. The rustle of undergrowth out of rhythm with the evening breeze, moving against it. "They're closing in," I whispered, the words barely a breath. "I know," Kieran replied, his voice a low vibration. His silver eyes scanned the deepening shadows, missing nothing. "Jackson, Lyra, positions." The two warriors flowed into the darkness like ink into water. Elias faded behind us, a silent promise that no one would strike from the rear. We kept walking, a deliberate pace toward the Lycan border, 3 miles distant. The path was a trap, and we all knew it. "When I tell you," Kieran murmured, his lips brushing my ear, "you will run straight ahead. Do not stop. Do not look back. Jackson will be with you." A chill that had nothing to do with the night seized me. "I won't leave you." "You won't be," he assured me, his thumb stroking my knuckles. "But I need to know you are safe before I can educate our unwanted escorts on the folly of their choices." The first wolf exploded from a thicket 20 feet ahead, a snarling mass of tawny fur and bared teeth. Rylan, Kale's hot-headed beta, all brute strength and shallow loyalty. He blocked the path, a growl rumbling from his chest that spoke of promised violence. 2 more materialized on our left, another pair on our right. Then, from behind, a low, answering snarl. Elias was there, a silent shadow confronting them. 5 in total, shifted, hunting formation. "Run," Kieran said, his voice calm, almost conversational. But my feet were rooted, because from the gloom beside Rylan, a larger, darker wolf emerged. His coat was the color of storm clouds, his eyes burning with a familiar, tormented gold. Kale. He had left his own wedding feast, his new bride, to do this, to chase the ghost he'd created into the dark. My breath hitched, not from fear of him, but from the devastating, pathetic spectacle of it. "Well," Lyra's voice drifted from somewhere to my left, sounding eerily amused, "this is a decidedly poor life choice." The wolves began to circle, a tightening noose of fang and claw. They'd done this before, to rogues, to trespassers, but the Lycan guards didn't react with the panic they expected. Jackson simply cracked his neck, a sound like breaking stone. Kale shifted back to human form, naked and shivering not from cold but from rampant, unchecked emotion. His gaze was a wild thing, latching onto me. "You're not leaving." "I left 3 months ago," I said, my voice echoing strangely in the tense silence. "You held the door open yourself." "I made a mistake." The confession tore from him, ragged and raw, echoing through the trees. His packmates flinched, their circling faltering. This was not the script. "I was wrong, Ilara, about everything, about you." Kieran's hand settled on my shoulder, not restraining but supporting, a solid wall at my back. "You're disrupting your own wedding to tell my wife you made a mistake," Kieran observed, his tone lethally mild. "How poignant." "She is not your wife," Kale roared, taking a step forward. Instantly the air shifted. Jackson and Lyra were just mare, not attacking, but their presence now a palpable barrier, a line drawn in the soil. "She can't be. This is a..." Kieran's gaze swept over the rest of them, a predator marking prey. "My wife is a queen of the oldest bloodline on this continent," he stated, as if discussing the weather. "She commands loyalty you cannot comprehend. She is loved and she is feared in realms you will never see. And you," he said, his eyes landing finally on Kale, "you call her half-breed, you call her nothing." He smiled, and it was the most terrifying sight I had ever witnessed. "Shall I show you what a real Lycan does to those who insult his heart?" "No!" Kale staggered forward, putting himself between Kieran and his cowering friends. "This ends now. We're leaving." "A wise decision," Jackson's voice grunted from the shadows. Kale looked at me one last time, a shattered man in the ruins of his own making. "Ilara, please, just tell me there's a chance, a shred of what we had." I looked at him, at the boy I'd loved, now a stranger paved with regret. "There's no chance, Kale," I said, the finality absolute. "There's only your future with Celine and mine with him. Go home, and let me go home." I turned my back on him, on my past, on the pain. I took Kieran's waiting hand. His fingers closed around mine, warm and sure. "Let's go home," I said. And as we walked away, I heard it, a raw, broken sound, like the howl of a fatally wounded animal. Kale, on his knees in the dirt. I didn't look back. His pain was his own to carry now. I had a king beside me, a crown ahead of me, and for the first time, a future that was wholly, completely mine. But as we moved deeper into the territory between packs, the feeling of being watched returned, sharper now. It wasn't Kale, it was something else, something that had been waiting in these woods long before the wedding, long before my pain, and it was very, very interested in the new Lycan queen. We did not stop until the forest thinned, giving way to a rugged, moonlit pass guarded by towering peaks that scraped the belly of the sky. The air grew crisp, thin, carrying the scent of ice and stone. There, waiting like silent beasts of legend, were 3 black vehicles, their windows darker than the night. No one spoke as we climbed inside. The engine's purr was a soothing vibration after the tension of the woods. Kieran sat beside me, a solid, silent presence, his gaze fixed on the winding road ahead, as the driver, another imposing Lycan named Rohan, navigated the treacherous path with impossible ease. I watched the world I'd known, the world of dense, familiar forests and packlands, recede through the tinted glass. Somewhere back there, Kale was nursing his shattered pride and a broken bond. Celine was weeping into a pillow stained with mascara. Their perfect day was in ashes, and I was leaving it all behind. "Tell me about tomorrow," I said softly, turning away from the window. I needed to anchor myself in the future, not the receding past. Kieran's hand found mine in the dim light of the dashboard. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice a low rumble, "the Council of Elders wishes to meet with you. They have questions about your proposed healing enclave for the southern refugees." I blinked. My proposed, but I only mentioned it to Vera in passing. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Vera has a way of turning passing thoughts into formal proposals, especially when they are good thoughts. The southern clans are fleeing a tyrant. Their wounds are not just physical. Our healers are skilled, but their methods are abrupt. Vera believes your gentler touch, your understanding of non-Lycan physiology could be the bridge they need. The weight of it settled on me. Not a burden, but a purpose. They'll listen to me, the elders? They will listen.
The perimeter is secure, he said to Vera, but we must be vigilant. Kale is broken, and broken things are unpredictable. His allies may seek to regain favor through foolish acts. "Let them come," Vera said with a dismissive wave. "The mountains have teeth sharper than any wolf's." She focused on me. "The council tomorrow. Elder Oren is supportive, Elder Maris is skeptical. But it is Elder Theon who you must win over. He's traditional, powerful, and he believes a queen's place is to produce heirs, not tend to refugee wounds." A flicker of anxiety stirred in my stomach. "And what do you believe, Vera?" "I believe," she said, her eyes glowing in the firelight, "that a queen who heals is a queen who builds a kingdom that lasts. Heirs are born of love and stability. You are creating both. Remember that." Kieran's fingers tightened on my shoulders. "She will not face them alone." "No," I said, the word firm. I looked up at him, then at Vera. "But I must face them as myself, not just as your wife, Kieran, not just as your student, Vera, as Ilara, the healer, the queen." The silence that followed was profound approval. Vera raised her teacup in a silent toast. Kieran bent and pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "Then rest, my heart," he whispered. "Tomorrow you build your legacy." Later, in the royal chambers, a vast space of dark wood, firs, and a window that looked out over a kingdom of stars and peaks, Kieran stood at that window, his profile etched in moonlight. "What is it?" I asked, joining him. The view was terrifying and magnificent. "This place," he said, his voice quiet, "it has been a fortress, a prison, a tomb for kings. For 300 years I have ruled from this mountain, and it has never felt like a home. It felt like a duty carved from granite." He turned to me, his silver eyes capturing the starlight. "Until I brought you here. Now, for the first time, I see a hearth where there was only a watchfire. Do you feel it? The difference you have already made?" My throat tightened. I looked at this ancient, powerful being, this king of legends, and saw the lonely boy he must have been for centuries. "I feel that I belong here," I said honestly, "with you." He didn't kiss me, he didn't need to. He simply wrapped his arms around me, holding me close as we watched the silent, star-strewn kingdom below. The peace was absolute. But far below, in the darkest valleys between our mountain and the packlands, shadows moved that were not wolves. They were older, hungrier things, drawn by the tremor of change in the realm, by the scent of a new, gentle power on the ancient Lycan throne. They had heard a whisper on the wind, a whisper about a half-blood queen with a healer's touch. And in the depthless dark, they began to plan. For what is softer than a healer's heart, and what is easier to break? Morning in the citadel arrived not with a gentle sunrise, but with the slow, golden unveiling of the world from a throne of clouds. I stood before the arched window, the emerald gown from yesterday replaced by one of deep sapphire blue, simple, elegant, and borrowed from Vera's own youth. It felt like armor. "They are assembled," Kieran said from the doorway. He was dressed in the formal black and silver of his station, every inch the unapproachable king, but his eyes, when they met mine, were gentle. "Remember, you are not on trial. You are their queen." I took a steadying breath. "I am a healer addressing a council, that is all."
Then, from the quietest elder, a woman named Lyra, who had not yet spoken, came a soft, dry chuckle. "She uses our own arguments of strength and turns them into pillars of compassion. Clever girl." She nodded at me, a glint of respect in her milky eyes. "I have seen the refugees. Their pain is real. If the queen believes she can mend it, I say let her try. What do we risk but a few herbs and some time?" "We risk appearing weak," Theon insisted, but his fury was blunted, his argument now contested from within his own circle. "No," said Elder Oren, a pragmatic male with a kind face. "We risk appearing strong enough to be kind, a potent message in these treacherous times." He looked at me. "What do you require, Queen Alara?" My heart leapt. A dedicated space within the lower citadel, supplies from the healers' gardens, and volunteers from among your own healers to learn these adapted methods. "Granted," Orin said, before Theon could object. The meeting moved on to border disputes and trade agreements, but the dynamic had shifted. I was no longer a specter at Kieran's side. I had spoken, I had been challenged, and I had not broken. As the council disbanded, Theon approached, his expression unreadable. "You speak prettily, girl, but words do not heal shattered bones. We will be watching closely." "I would expect nothing less, Elder," I replied with a respectful incline of my head. When the last elder had departed, Kieran let out a long, slow breath. He turned to me, and the fierce pride in his silver eyes was a reward greater than any victory. "You were magnificent. You did not fight him, you outmaneuvered him. I have debated Theon for a century and never won so decisively." Exhaustion suddenly washed over me, the adrenaline receding. "I just told the truth." "The truth," Vera said, emerging from a shadowed archway where she had been listening, "is the most powerful weapon of all. You have won your first council, child, but Theon is not your only adversary." Her face grew solemn. "There are whispers from the southern passes. The tyrant the refugees flee, he has a name, Mordred, and he has taken a personal interest in the gentle queen who dares to mend the broken things he creates. He sees your compassion not as strength, but a doorway. Be vigilant, Alara. Your healing hands have drawn the eye of a monster." The warmth of my success curdled into ice in my veins. I had thought my battles were behind me, the battle with Kale, the battle for respect, but Vera's words painted a new, more terrifying battlefield. I had stepped onto a stage far larger than a pack clearing or a council chamber, and in the shadows of that stage, a new player waited, one who did not want to humiliate or reject me. He wanted to break the hope I represented, and he was coming. The lower citadel was a world away from the silent, stony grandeur above. Here the air hummed with life, pain, and the desperate scent of hope. The space granted by the council, a long, vaulted hall once used for storing grain, now held rows of simple cots. On them lay the refugees. My first step into the hall stole my breath, not from smell, though the air was thick with herbs and unwashed bodies and fear. It was the weight of their silent suffering. Men, women, even children, their bodies bearing the brutal marks of Mordred's reign, lash marks that refused to close, wounds poisoned by dark magic, eyes hollow with a terror so deep it had become part of the Lycan healers watched, their initial skepticism giving way to fascinated note-taking, then to hesitant imitation. By day's end, the atmosphere in the hall had transformed. The air of despair was still there, but it was now threaded with something new, something fragile and beautiful, hope. As the evening torches were lit, I collapsed onto a stool by a water basin, my hands trembling, my energy utterly spent. I felt hollowed out, but it was a clean emptiness. Vera placed a cup of revitalizing tea beside me. "You channeled your gift for hours," she said, her voice full of awe. "I have not seen its like in 500 years. It is not just healing, Alara. It is cleansing. You restore not just flesh, but fate." Kieran appeared in the doorway, having finished his own duties. He took in the scene, the quieter hall, the sleeping refugees, the healers speaking in low, respectful tones to the Southerners. His gaze found me, drenched in sweat and exhaustion, and the love in his silver eyes was a tangible warmth. He came to me not as king, but as a mate. He knelt before my stool, taking my weary hands in his. "Vera says you moved mountains today," he whispered. "Only pebbles," I breathed, leaning my forehead against his. "No," he said firmly, "you moved a mountain of suffering, and in its place you have planted a garden. I am in awe of you." As we left the hall for the quiet upper citadel, one of the elder healers, a stern male named Corvin, stopped me. He bowed, deeply and with obvious respect. "My queen," he said, "your methods, they are unorthodox, but the results are undeniable. I would be honored to learn more." It was a victory sweeter than any council debate. But that night, as I lay in the deep silence of our chamber, the memory of Vera's warning returned. "Mordred sees your compassion as a doorway." I had opened that door today, poured light through it. I had shown my most vulnerable, powerful self to the world. And somewhere in the southern darkness, a tyrant with a taste for breaking gentle things had felt that light shine. He would see it not as a beacon of hope, but as a challenge, a flaw in the armor of the legendary Lycans, a soft, beating heart to be ripped out and displayed. My healing became my declaration of war, and the enemy was now watching, plotting, drawing closer with every life I saved. The sanctuary had been born, but its first test was already marching toward us through the night. A week passed in a rhythm of exhausted, purposeful dawns and deep, dreamless sleeps. The healing hall, now called Moonwater Sanctuary by the refugees, thrived. Lycan healers worked alongside Southern volunteers, their mutual suspicion dissolving in the shared language of mended flesh and soothed spirits. I was no longer just the king's wife, I was the dawn singer, the soul stitcher, titles whispered with reverence. It was during a lesson with Corvin on aligning crystal harmonics with bone setting that a palace guard, his face unnaturally pale, appeared at the hall's entrance. He carried a simple, rough-spun pouch. "For the queen," he said, his voice strained. Kieran, who often came to watch my work, was at my side in an instant. He took the pouch, his expression granite. With careful fingers, he loosened the drawstring and tilted it. A single, folded parchment slid out, along with a small, dried, and terribly familiar flower, a moon petal, fragile and white. They only grew in one place, the sacred grove of my former pack, where Kale had first claimed me as his mate. Yet as we left the sanctuary, Vera was waiting in the corridor, her face etched with new, deeper worry. She held another message, this one on fine vellum, sealed with a sigil I didn't recognize, a twisted serpent devouring a rose. "This came through other channels," Vera said dryly. "It is not from the wolf." Kieran took it, breaking the seal. His eyes scanned the elegant, chilling script. His face, for the first time since I'd known him, paled slightly. He handed it to me. "To the dawn singer. Your light reaches far. It is a pretty candle in a vast, hungry dark. I so enjoy the games of healing. They make the breaking so much more poetic. I have a subject for you, one of my own. His wounds are intricate, a masterpiece of suffering. I send him to you. See if your gentle songs can unsing my symphony. I will be watching. M. No title, no demand, just a promise, a delivery. Mordred. The tyrant wasn't just watching, he was engaging. He was sending me a gift, a living, breathing piece of his cruelty for me to try and mend. It was a test, a taunt, a declaration that my sanctuary was now part of his game. The peace of the last week shattered. Kale's pathetic threats were a guttering candle next to this looming wildfire. We stood between a spurned wolf's venom and a monster's macabre challenge. The moonlight was in 3 days, and somewhere on the road to our gates, a nightmare in human form was approaching, carrying all of Mordred's vicious artistry. The battle for my past was converging with the war for our future, and both enemies were now on the march. 2 days later, the gift arrived. He came at dusk, stumbling through the lower gates, supported by 2 grim-faced border guards. He wasn't a warrior. He was a scholar, or had been. A middle-aged man with gentle eyes, now clouded with a pain so profound it had etched new lines into his face. He wore tattered robes and clutched a sealed, ornate scroll case to his chest as if it were his own child. They brought him directly to the Moonwater Sanctuary, bypassing all other protocols. The hall fell silent as we saw him. There were no bloody wounds, no broken limbs, yet the song of his pain was the most deafening, discordant shriek I had ever felt. It vibrated in the air, a silent scream that made my teeth ache. Vera went still beside me. "By the stars," she breathed, "it is a soul wound." Kieran was there, a shadow of fury at my back. Mordred's work? The man, whose name we learned was Alden, simply nodded, his whole body trembling. He held out the scroll case with shaking hands. "For the Dawn Singer," he said, his voice ruined. He said, "You must read it to understand." I took the cold metal case. The weight of it felt evil. Breaking the seal, I pulled out a single sheet of parchment. The script was the same elegant, cruel hand. "Dearest Healer, Alden is a historian, a keeper of songs and stories. His crime was knowing a truth I wished forgotten. So I did not break his body, I broke his truth. I spent a month showing him alternate histories, using certain herbs, certain pressures on the mind. Now his reality is a shattered mirror. He does not know what is memory and what is my design. He believes his wife betrayed him, that his children fear him, that his life's work is a lie. The truth, that they love him, that his work is revered, is now the fantasy his mind rejects as pain. Heal that, songbird. Mend shattered." And tomorrow was the full moon. The stone falls. Kale's desperate plot. We had to face one enemy to fully turn our attention to the greater, more sinister one. But as I prepared for the confrontation, a chilling thought took root. What if these 2 threats, the spurned wolf and the distant tyrant, weren't separate at all? What if, in the shadows, they were already becoming strands of the same dark web? The night of the full moon hung over the world like a great, watchful eye. The Stonefalls were a day's hard ride from the Citadel, a place of thunderous, mist-shrouded waterfalls and massive flat stones worn smooth by centuries of cascading water. It was remote, dramatic, and the perfect stage for a desperate man's final act. We did not ride in state. Kieran, myself, Jackson, Lyra, and a hand-picked dozen of the king's personal guard moved through the forest like wraiths. We were clad in dark, non-reflective leathers, our scents masked by a paste of pine and shadow fern. We were not coming as monarchs, but as hunters. We arrived hours early under the cover of a clouded dusk. Kieran positioned us in a wide, concealed circle around the largest flat stone, the meeting place Cale had specified. Jackson and Lyra melted into the rocks near the waterfall's spray. The guards were shadows among the trees. Kieran and I settled behind a thick screen of ferns, close enough to see, close enough to hear. The weight was a taut wire, thrumming with tension. The roar of the falls was a constant, deafening white noise that would mask any but the closest approach. Mist beaded on my skin, cold as regret. "He will not come alone," Kieran murmured, his lips close to my ear to be heard over the water. "He will bring his most loyal, his most furious. They will want a confrontation. They will want to take you." I whispered back, my eyes scanning the moon-dappled clearing. "He wants a spectacle, to prove he can steal the Lycan King's prize. It's not about love, it's about pride." Kieran's hand found mine in the dark. His pride will be his funeral pyre. The moon climbed, bleaching the world to silver and black. Then they came. Cale emerged from the tree line first, a proud, tragic figure backlit by moonlight. But his pride was frayed, his posture tense. Behind him came 5 others, Rylan, Torin, and 3 other wolves from his inner circle. They were armed, their eyes scanning the clearing with nervous aggression. They expected a trap, but they were still arrogant enough to walk into it. Cale stepped onto the flat stone, his figure stark against the shimmering curtain of the falls. He turned, searching the shadows. "Alara," he called, his voice straining to be heard over the water. "I know you're here. I can feel you. Come out. Let's end this pretense." I made to move, but Kieran's grip tightened. Not yet. "You think he loves you?" he shouted to the empty night, a performer with a captive audience of ghosts. "He's using you. A half-blood queen makes him look merciful, progressive, but you'll never be one of them. You'll always be an outsider. Come back to where you belong, to me." His words were pathetic, but they were also a weapon, honed to find the cracks in my new confidence. I felt a flare of old anger, not love, but fury at his arrogant presumption. Kieran gave a slow, single nod. I stood up and stepped out of the ferns into a patch of moonlight at the edge of the clearing. I did not approach the stone. I let him see me, calm, still, a queen in hunting leathers. Cale's breath hitched. His eyes devoured me, full of a hungry, possessive hope. "Alara, you came. I received your invitation." We left them there, the broken alpha, his subdued warriors, the roaring falls washing away their pride. As we turned to leave, I glanced back one final time. The moon illuminated a figure I did not recognize, not the proud mate of my youth, but a lesson carved in sorrow. We had won. We had secured my past, but as we rode back toward the citadel in the pre-dawn gray, the victory felt hollow. We had spent the night fighting a ghost, a shadow of a threat, and while we were gone, a real monster's poisoned gift lay in our sanctuary, a ticking clock of a different, more profound war. Mordred was still out there, and he had just seen how we dealt with distractions. He would be planning his next, far more direct move. The peace of the stone falls was an illusion. The true storm was still gathering, and its eye was fixed squarely on the healing heart of our mountain. We returned to the citadel not to rest, but to face a different kind of storm. Elder Theon had called an emergency session of the council. News of Cale's intercepted plot, of the Lycan warriors' effortless dominance at the Stone Falls, had raced ahead of us like wildfire. It was not praise that awaited, but scrutiny. The chamber of echoes felt colder, the elders' faces harder. Theon did not wait for formalities. A public confrontation, he stated, his voice like grinding stones. A brawling in the dirt like common rogues. This is the stability you bring, King Kieran? This is the Queen's healing influence? Kieran remained seated, a study in controlled power. We prevented a kidnapping and a potential act of war, Elder. We displayed strength without spilling a drop of Lycan blood. That is not brawling. That is decisive diplomacy. Diplomacy, Elder Maris sneered, her frosty gaze on me. It is the Queen who is the catalyst. Her past is a snare that nearly dragged us into conflict. How many more scorned wolves will crawl out of the forests seeking her? Her very presence is a vulnerability. The words were meant to wound, to isolate. I felt the eyes of the council, no longer curious or reluctantly respectful, but calculating risk. I was a liability. I stood. The movement was quiet, but it drew every eye. You are correct, Elder Maris, I said, my voice clear in the vast space. A shocked ripple went through them. Agreement was not what they expected. I am a catalyst, but not for conflict. I walked slowly to the center of the stone circle, feeling the weight of their centuries-old judgment. I am a catalyst for change. Kale came because he saw something he threw away become priceless in another's hands. That is not my weakness, it is his, and it is a lesson for every pack that believes strength is only about the sharpness of your teeth. I turned to face Theon. You fear my past, but my past is why Alden, the broken historian in our sanctuary, sleeps without screaming tonight. I understand pain that has no physical scar. I understand the poison of a broken truth because I have lived it. I let the confession hang, raw and honest. Mordred did not send his gift to the mighty Lycan warriors. He sent it to me, because he knows that the most powerful weapon against his kind of evil is not a sharper blade, but a stronger light. He fears what I am building here. Should we not be bolstering what our enemy fears? Elder Oren leaned forward, his pragmatic eyes thoughtful. The Queen speaks sense. We have spent centuries behind our mountains, being feared. Mordred is not afraid of our fangs. He is afraid of her sanctuary. That is a new kind of
He is a sculptor, Alden whispered, his voice a dry leaf rustle. We had gathered around him, Kieran, Vera, Corvin, and I. The hall was quiet, the other refugees giving us a wide, respectful berth. He is a sculptor, not of stone, but of memory. He uses a poison, dream shade it's called. It grows in black bogs under a waning moon. It doesn't kill, it unravels. He clutched a blanket tightly, his knuckles white. He made me watch for weeks as he rewrote the history of my own life. He showed me false faces of my family, saying cruel things. He made me remember betrayals that never were. The poison makes the mind suggestible. It accepts the new story to escape the pain of the contradiction. Vera sucked in a sharp breath. Dream shade? I thought it legend, a myth from the Bloodwood Wars. It is real, Alden insisted, a tremor running through him. He has gardens of it. He calls them his clay pits. But there is a flaw. He looked directly at me, his gaze sharpening. The anchor, the stone, the light. What you did, it created a fixed point, a real thing my mind could not deny. And around that fixed point, a memory tried to reform, a true one. He closed his eyes, wrestling with the phantom pain. The day he gave me the scroll case to bring to you, he was excited, proud. He spoke to someone, not to me, I was already drifting, but to a lieutenant. He said, Alden's brow furrowed, the effort physical,
He said, "The dawn singer will try to heal this one. Her compassion is her window. When she is focused here, on this broken toy, she will not see the dagger from the north." Ice water flooded my veins. Kieran went statue still. "A dagger from the north?" Kieran's voice was dangerously soft. Alden nodded, opening his eyes. They were clear and full of dread. He said, "The wolves there are prideful and wounded. Their alpha is a blunt instrument, but his rage is an arrow that can be aimed. Ensure the Lycans are looking south, at me, when the arrow flies." The pieces, terrible and sharp, clicked together. Cale's desperate plot at the Stonefalls, it hadn't just been his own madness, it had been encouraged, stoked. Mordred had been manipulating him from afar, using Cale's bruised ego and obsession as a weapon to divide our attention. The gift of Alden was not just a challenge, it was the first move in a pincer attack, Mordred from the south and a provoked, unstable Cale from the north. We have been looking at two separate enemies, but it is one enemy with two faces. Mordred is not just a tyrant, he's a strategist. He wages war not with armies, but with despair, pride, and poisoned memory. He looked at me, and the protectiveness in his— "No," I said, my voice firm. My gift, the one that felt pain and truth, might be the only thing that could discern Boren's whispered falsehoods from the genuine grievances of the wolves he was manipulating. He trades in poisoned stories. I need to hear them. Kieran searched my face, then gave a single, sharp nod. "Stay between Jackson and Elias. Do not engage. Listen." We entered the earth. The tunnel was not a smooth passage. It was a chaos of collapsed sections, narrow squeezes, and sudden yawning chambers. Our only light came from faintly glowing moss that clung to the walls, giving everything a sickly greenish hue. The air grew colder, thicker, carrying whispers of ancient drafts and the distant rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water. And then we heard the voices. Not echoes, but live, tense conversation, distorted by the stone. We froze, pressing against the cold tunnel wall. "The Lycans took him in chains. Our alpha, they humiliated him. They think because they have some ancient blood, they can treat us like rodents." A young, angry wolf's voice hissed. A second, calmer, smoother voice answered. It was like oil over broken glass. Boren. "It is not just humiliation, it is a message. The half-blood queen fears a true alpha. She fears the old bonds. She convinced her frost-hearted king to break Cale, to break us before we can rise. They know a united northern pack is a threat to their new, gentle empire." I felt Kieran tense beside me, a silent rage. These were the lies, carefully seated. "We are not weak," the first wolf growled. "No," Boren agreed, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "You are betrayed. Your alpha is broken by treachery, not strength. And while the Lycans parade their healer queen, they plan their next move, to absorb your lands, to dilute your bloodline, to make you servants in your own forests." The lies were potent, twisting a fraction of truth, Cale's defeat, into a narrative of Lycan ambition and my own malign influence. We edged closer, peering around a rough-hewn corner into a larger cavern. A handful of wolves, 5 or 6, all young, their faces etched with frustration and the intoxicating poison of perceived injustice, stood by Boren. He was not what I expected. He was slight, almost scholarly, with pale hair and eyes the color of a shallow stream. He looked harmless, which was his greatest weapon. He held a small, dark-stained clay pot. "This," he said softly, "is the proof of their contempt. dream shade residue found near their eastern border outpost. They are not just warriors, they are poisoners. They seek to cloud your minds, as they clouded your alphas, to make you docile. It was a masterstroke. He was using the evidence of his own weapon to frame us. One of the wolves, a fierce she-wolf, snarled. We should strike now, before they think we're beaten. Patience, Boren soothed, placing a hand on her arm. Strike at the heart. The queen is their symbol. She travels to the border sanctuaries next week, vulnerable, separated from her king. A message sent then, a life for a life, would show them our fangs are not pulled. The plan was clear, chilling. They meant to assassinate me, to shatter the symbol of hope and plunge the North into vengeful war with the Lycans. I felt a surge of anger, not fear. This man, this whisperer, was sculpting deaths with his tongue. Kieran looked at me, a question in his eyes. Now? I shook my head. I needed to hear more. I needed to understand the depth of the lie. I closed my eyes, pushing past my own anger, and reached out with that other sense. I let the emotional currents of the Boren sat in a cell carved from the mountain's heart, deep below the citadel. It was not a dungeon of chains and rats, but a place of utter silence and stillness, designed to hold beings for whom iron was no barrier. The silence was his torture. The master of whispers had only his own thoughts for company, and from the grim reports, they were not pleasant ones. The mood in the citadel, however, was transformed. The northern threat had not just been neutralized, it had been unmasked. Wolves from Kale's pack and others had begun to arrive, not with weapons, but with wary envoys, seeking clarification, sharing their own stories of Boren's poison. My sanctuary received new patients, some with physical wounds from skirmishes Boren had provoked, others with the mental scars of his lies. I was in the healing hall applying a poultice of crushed sun moss to a gashed shoulder when Elder Theon appeared in the doorway. He did not enter the bustle of the hall, but stood at the threshold, his flinty eyes taking in the scene, Lycan and Wolf working side by side, the quiet murmur of recovery, the absence of despair. I finished my work, washed my hands in a basin, and walked to him. Elder Theon, do you require something? He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "He have just come from the interrogation chambers," he said, his voice low. "Boren will not break easily, but he has confirmed much. Mordred's network is wider than we feared. There are others like him in other territories, sowing discord." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Then our work is only beginning. Yes, Theon agreed. Then, to my shock, he sighed, a sound of granite shifting. "I have served this crown for 200 years. I have seen kings rule with fear, with cold logic, with unyielding strength. I believed that was the only way to hold a kingdom of our nature." He looked past me at a southern refugee child laughing as a Lycan healer showed her a glowing crystal. I was wrong. He met my gaze again, and the harshness in his eyes had softened into something like weary respect. "You do not rule, Queen Alara. You weave. You took the frayed threads of a broken historian, a furious pack, and a council of stubborn old wolves, and you are weaving something new, something Mordred cannot simply smash. He must unravel it thread by thread, and that is a slower, harder fight." He bowed his head, a deep, formal gesture he had never afforded me before. "The council is united. The resources of the citadel are yours. Weave your tapestry, my queen, and let us see if it can become armor strong enough to turn a tyrant's blade." He turned and left me standing stunned in the doorway. It was not a declaration of love or even full approval. It was something rarer. The acknowledgement of a strategist who finally saw the value in a different kind of weapon, my weapon. That evening, Kieran found me in our chamber's solar, staring at the fire. He placed a heavy, velvet-lined box before me. "A gift," he said softly, "not from the king, from me." I opened it. Inside, on a bed of black silk, lay a circlet, not the massive spiked crown of the Lycan High King, but something delicate and fierce. It was woven of platinum strands, like moonlight given form, and set not with jewels, but with a single teardrop-shaped moonstone that glowed with its own soft white luminescence. At its center, almost hidden in the weave, was a tiny... The citadel shifted from a place of healing to a fortress preparing for siege. Yet the preparation was different. There were no cries of panic from the refugees in the Moonwater Sanctuary. Instead, Southerners who could stand took up tasks, carrying water, preparing bandages, cooking vast cauldrons of stew. They were not hiding, they were defending their new home. Lycan warriors, once aloof, now trained alongside Wolfpack volunteers in the lower courtyards. The tapestry Theon had spoken of was being tested, and it held. The War Council was held in the Chamber of Echoes, but it was no longer just the 12 elders. Alpha Brighton was there, representing a humbled but unified Northern Alliance. Kale stood beside him, not as a leader but as a penitent, his eyes downcast, his presence a symbol of the cost of Mordred's manipulation. Selene was at his side, her hand on his arm, not in possession but in sober solidarity. Even Flora and little Lily were there, representing the families within the sanctuary walls. "He will reach the Blackthorn Defile in 3 days, Jackson reported, pointing to a map. "The narrowest point before the open plains that lead to our gates. It is the place to make a stand. If he breaks through there..." "He will not break through," Kieran said, his voice absolute. But his strategy was not what anyone expected. He looked at me. "We will meet him at the Blackthorn, but our front line will not be our heaviest warriors." All eyes turned to me. My heart hammered against my ribs. I understood. "Our front line," Kieran continued, "will be our truth. It will be our healed. It will be our unity." He looked at Alden, who stood tall, his mind clear, his family safe in the Citadel's deepest halls. He looked at Fia, the she-wolf from the tunnels, now a lieutenant in the Northern United Guard. He looked at the elders, at the refugees, at me. "Mordred wages war on reality itself. We will show him a reality he cannot poison." The day of the confrontation dawned gray and solemn. We stood at the mouth. Mordred's smile didn't falter, but it grew cold. "One man. A parlor trick." I gestured to Fia and the Northern Wolves. "You sowed lies between brothers. You told them we were enemies. Look at them now, standing with us. Your whispers have been answered with a shout of unity." Then, I did something I had not planned. I turned my back on Mordred, facing our own combined army, facing the refugees, the wolves, the Lycans. I raised my hands, not in command, but in invitation, and I began to sing. Not a lullaby, not a healing melody, a wordless song of pure, defiant hope, a song of roots digging deep into stone, of unbreakable bonds, of a light that refused to be swallowed. I poured every ounce of my gift into it, not to heal a single wound, but to fortify 1,000 hearts. And something miraculous happened. The refugees began to hum, a low, steady vibration. The wolves picked up the tune, a resonant harmony. The Lycans, their voices deeper than the earth, joined in, a bedrock rhythm. The song swelled, rolling out of the defile, across the plain, a tangible wave of collective will, of shared purpose. It was the sound of the tapestry singing. I turned back to Mordred. His army, his perfectly disciplined host, was stirring. I saw it in their eyes, a flicker of doubt, of memory, of a self they thought Mordred had erased. The void he projected met a wall of solid, resonant truth. For the first time, his contemptuous mask cracked. Fury, raw and ugly, flashed in his eyes. "Enough!" he screamed, his voice losing his smooth control. "Kill them! Silence that infernal noise!" But the charge, when it came, was ragged, hesitant. The song had disrupted his perfect control. Kieran raised his sword, a silent command. Our united forces did not scream a battle cry, they simply advanced, their steps in time with the song, an unstoppable tide of conviction. I did not see the full battle. My role was done. Kieran, Jackson, Lyra, Brighton, Kale, fighting not for pride but for redemption, they led the countercharge. The clashing of steel and snarls of wolves became the percussion to our song. I stood with